Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Sessions, let me first say I'm glad that you brought your family with you today. It's a beautiful family with your wife and your son and daughters and those 4 beautiful little granddaughters, and you kept them as quiet as you could for as long as you could. So thank you so much for being here today. I'm sure it was great moral support and part of your effort here today. When you came by my office last week, I talked to you about a man named Alton Mills, and with the permission of the chair, he's my guest today. I asked Mr. Mills if he'd please stand up. Alton, thank you for being here today. I'd like to tell you a story so you can understand my question a little better. When Alton Mills was 22 years old, unemployed, he made a bad decision. He started selling crack cocaine on the streets of Chicago. He was arrested twice for possession of small amounts of crack cocaine. The third time that he was arrested, the kingpins who had employed him turned on him, and as a consequence, he ended up being prosecuted under the 3 strikes and you're out law. At the age of 24, he was sentenced to life without parole. He had never been in prison before, and as I mentioned, there were no allegations made against him other than possession and sale, no violence, no guns, nothing of that nature. Alton Mills ended up, despite the sentencing judge's admonition that he believed this was fundamentally unfair and his hands were tied, Alton Mills ended up spending 22 years in federal prison until December 2015 when President Obama commuted his sentence. He was finally able to go home to his family. Senator Sessions, 7 years ago, you and I co-sponsored a bill known as the Fair Sentencing Act, which Senator Collins referenced earlier, and that reduced the brutal sentencing disparity for crack cocaine crimes over powder cocaine. It was originally 100 to 1. We agreed, in the Senate gym I might add, to bring that down to 18 to 1. Inmates, overwhelmingly African American, were spared thousands of prison years because of our joint effort to end this injustice. Yet when I asked you to join me in appealing to the Sentencing Commission to follow our law, and when I asked you to join Senator Grassley and me in permitting the almost 5,000 still serving under this unfair 100 to 1 standard to petition individually for leniency, you refused. And you said of President Obama's pardoning of people like Alton Mills, and I quote, "President Obama continues to abuse executive power in an unprecedented, reckless manner to systematically release high-level drug traffickers and firearms felons. So-called low-level nonviolent offenders simply do not exist in the federal system," you said. Senator Sessions, Alton Mills, and many more just like him do exist. So if you refuse to even acknowledge the fundamental injustice of many of our sentencing laws, why should you be entrusted with the most important criminal prosecution office in America?
Senator Durbin, I think that's rather unfair based on our relationship and how we work together. In 2001, I introduced legislation very similar to the bill that you and I successfully made law. It would have reduced it to 20 to 1. Our bill went to 18 to 1, a little better, but fundamentally that. I was criticized by the Bush Department of Justice. My legislation was opposed by them. It was 7 years later or so, or really longer, before our bill ever passed. So I stepped out against my own Republican administration and said openly on the floor of the Senate that I believe these crack cocaine laws were too harsh, and particularly it was disadvantageous to the African American community where most of the punishments were falling. And it was not fair, and we ought to fix it. So I just want to say, I took a strong stand on that, and I did not agree, you and I did not agree on the retroactivity because a lot of these were plea bargain cases and may not have been totally driven by the mandatory minimums. But so I thought the court had basically now agreed that it is retroactive. I don't know what group is not being covered by it, but a large group was covered by a court decision. We sort of left it open, as I remember.
We did.
You and I discussed it.
Let me say, on the issue of fairness, I will acknowledge you stepped out on this issue. And you and I both recognize the brutal injustice of 100 to 1. And we agreed on 18 to 1. That's how laws are made. And now we have 5,000 prisoners sitting in federal prison, still there under this brutal, unjust 100 to 1. And all I've asked, and all Senator Grassley's asked, allow them as individuals to petition to the judge, to the prosecutor, to the Department of Justice, so that their sentences could be considered. That's something you've opposed. So in fairness, tell me why you still oppose that.
Well, first I will tell you with absolute certainty that if this is a decision of this body, it's not the Attorney General's decision about when and where a mandatory minimum is imposed and whether it can be retroactively altered. So I will follow any law that you pass, number one. Number two, I understood the sincere belief you had on that issue, and it was a difficult call, and that's why we really never worked it out. So I understand what you're saying, but I did believe that you are upsetting finality in the justice system, that you are suggesting that these kind of factors were not considered when the plea bargaining went down. So it's an honorable debate to have, and I respect your position on it.
Senator, you have been outspoken on another issue, and I would like to address it if I could. I have invited here today Sergeant Oscar Vasquez, if he would be kind enough to stand up and be recognized. Sergeant, thank you for being here. I'll tell you his incredible story in short form. Brought to the United States as a child. In high school, he and 3 other dreamers started a robotics club and won a college-level robotics competition. They made a movie out of his story. He graduated from Arizona State University with an engineering degree. The Obama administration granted him a waiver and allowed him to become a citizen and enlist in the United States Army, where he served in combat in Afghanistan. Senator Sessions, since joining the Senate in 1997, you'd voted against every immigration bill that included a path to citizenship for the undocumented. You described the DREAM Act, which I introduced 15 years ago to spare children who are undocumented through no fault of their own, as, quote, a reckless proposal for mass amnesty. You opposed the bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform bill, which passed the Senate 4 years ago. You've objected to immigrants volunteering to serve in our armed forces, saying, quote, in terms of who's going most likely to be a spy, somebody from Cullman, Alabama, or somebody from Kenya. When I asked what you would do to address the almost 800,000 dreamers like Oscar Vasquez, who would be subject to deportation if President Obama's executive order was repealed, you said, quote, I believe in following the law. There is too much focus on people who are here illegally and not enough on the law. Senator Sessions, there's not a spot of evidence in your public career to suggest that as Attorney General, you would use the authority of that office to resolve the challenges of our broken immigration system in a fair and humane manner. Tell me I'm wrong.
Well, you are wrong, Senator Durbin. I'm going to follow the laws passed by Congress. As a matter of policy, we disagreed on some of those issues. I do believe that if you can continually go through a cycle of amnesty, that you undermine the respect for the law and encourage more illegal immigration into America. I believe the American people spoke clearly in this election. I believe they agreed with my basic view, and I think it's a good view, a decent view, a solid legal view for the United States of America, that we create a lawful system of immigration that allows people to apply to this country, and if they're accepted, they get in. If they're not accepted, they don't get in. And I believe that's right and just, and the American people are right to ask for it. We have not delivered that for them.
Senator Graham asked this question, and I listened to your answer when he asked you what would happen to those 800,000 currently protected by President Obama's executive order known as DACA, who cannot be deported for 2 years, it's renewable, and can work for 2 years, and you said, let Congress pass a comprehensive immigration reform bill. You opposed the only bipartisan effort that we've had on the Senate floor in modern memory. And what's going to happen to those 800,000 if you revoke that order and they are subject to deportation tomorrow? What is going to happen to them? What is the humane legal answer to that?
Well, the first thing I would say is that my response to Senator Graham dealt with whose responsibility this is. I had a responsibility as a member of this body to express my view and vote as I believed was correct on dealing with issues of immigration. That's not the Attorney General's role. The Attorney General's role is to enforce the law. And as you know, Senator Durbin, we're not able financially or any other way to seek out and remove everybody that's in the country illegally. President Trump has indicated that criminal aliens, like President Obama indicated, certainly are the top group of people. And so I would think that the best thing for us to do, and I would urge colleagues that we understand this, let's fix this system. And then we can work together after this lawlessness has been ended, and then we can ask the American people and enter into a dialogue about how to compassionately treat people who've been here a long time.
That does not answer the question about 800,000 that would be left in the lurch, whose lives would be ruined while you're waiting on Congress for a bill that you opposed.
Well, I thought it did answer it pretty closely to what you asked, and I understand your concerns.